My name is Barry Lynn. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Markets Institute. And welcome to the Future of Democracy, the Future of Human Liberty. And the subtitle of our event is Speech, Thought, Sovereignty, Power, and Power in the Age of X and AI. So we gather today to begin to finish the job of mastering the online technologies on which we all depend, to make them work for our families and our children and the common good, to place these incredibly powerful platforms now and forever under democratic control. We gathered today to begin to fix what we failed to fix over the last decade since we first really began to understand the vast array of threats, economic and political, posed by today's tech platforms. Most especially in the form of the threat these private corporations pose to our freedoms of speech and inquiry and thought, our liberty of conscience. We are thrilled to have you with us today and tomorrow. We have a great collection of speakers for a discussion that could not be more timely or important. For today, we have three main goals. First is to recognize the ultimate technical source of today's crisis of liberty and the political crises in so many of our democracies. This source lies in our failure to impose the prime original rule of liberal democracy on today's online communications platforms, which is rule of law designed to ensure that both the state and any corporation that controls an essential service, like communications or search, always serve everyone equally, that they never discriminate, never manipulate the individual, just as we did with every previous communications platform since the post office. It was this failure to impose non-discrimination rules that left these corporations free to develop business models based on control over and manipulation of what we read and see and with whom we speak. For 400 years, liberals assumed only the state could threaten freedom of speech and thought. But today, thanks to our failure, we see that the private corporation can pose threats to human liberty as great as the state. Worse, we see that these corporations today are already exploiting their manipulation systems to promote their own political ends, including sometimes by making these same awesome powers of political manipulation available to actors within the state. Our second goal today is to recognize that the ultimate political source of today's crisis is us, the liberals of the world. In the 1990s, people who believe in liberal democracy began to abandon the rules and systems of liberty, rules and systems that smarter generations of people had refined over 400 years. They did so in favor of corporate libertarianism, radical laissez-faire. This was true, to some degree, of liberals around the world. It was especially true of American liberals. For 4 centuries, people understood that liberal democracy requires constant regulation of power to prevent any concentration of arbitrary control, to ensure neither the state nor the corporation ever enjoy any ability to manipulate the specific individual. Yet when people in Europe and elsewhere stood to fix the problem, Americans bullied them. President Bush bullied Europe. President Obama bullied Europe. They said, we know better than you. They said, let the corporations rule. American liberals bullied everyone else, even while failing to protect their own freedoms and the well-being of their own children, because they failed to understand how corporate libertarianism had blinded them to the concentration of power and control over them. Our third goal today is to recognize that the key to victory is solidarity. Today in the U.S., some speak of civilizational allies. Amen. True conservatives, true liberals, true Democrats have been civilizational allies for 400 years. Today in this room, this is a gathering of civilizational allies. a civilization dedicated to the full liberty and dignity of every citizen, every human, whatever their political or religious belief. Some fear that regulating the behavior of these corporations will stifle innovation. We hear that in London a lot. We hear that in capitals across Europe. The time has come to remember that when you use power to distribute power, to neutralize control, this makes every individual citizen and every individual business more free to create prosperity and abundance, to ensure security and resilience, to innovate and build the new. There's also a lot of political fear in liberal societies today. Some fear that standing to protect one's own democracy, one's own liberties, will lead to retaliation. It's important to remember that most true conservatives in America also believe in the traditional goals and systems of liberal democracy. True conservatives, after all, are a subset of liberals. Not only do conservatives stand with us, they have been warning us of our folly. For a decade, our conservative friends have warned we are not being heard. Google and Facebook are suppressing our speech arbitrarily. For years, we liberals failed to heed their warnings. Some of us actually welcome the idea of using the tech giants to silence our political opponents. From the first, our team at Open Markets and some of our allies have worked across the aisle with Democrats, Republicans, independents, with Christian Democrats and socialists and Greens, with true libertarians, as opposed to corporate libertarians. In almost every party, we find that some stand against us, but we find that most stand with us. The lesson for Europe: be a rock in defense of your liberty, and every on-rushing river will split. Today and tomorrow, we will hear depressing stories and inspiring stories, but we will also hear of an awakening. In America today, the attempt to cancel Jimmy Kimmel led many to awaken for the first time to the dangers posed by conglomeration of power over the press and manipulation of speech and communications by the dominant platforms. So too in the UK, thanks to the recent rally that descended into violence. Finally, liberals are learning that we too are not being heard, that our voices too are being suppressed and manipulated by these all-powerful corporations, just as the conservatives warned. And that leads to the logical next step, which is to work across the political spectrum in every country in the world to ensure that the corporations that host our communications never exploit their middleman, gatekeeper, essential positions to manipulate how one citizen speaks to another, to ensure the citizen is always in control. Our goal must be equally free speech for all, no personalized amplification, no personalized suppression, no personalized censorship ever again, no interference in the news, no monopolization of the advertising on which so much of our free press depends ever again, no more pitting of European against European and of American against American for profit ever again. So today, let's begin the next 400 years of liberty and democracy, of liberal democracy for all. So that's what we're here to do. Thank you for being in the room, and I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Barry. Hello, everyone. I'm Barbora Bukovská. I'm a Senior Director for Law and Policy at Article 19, that together with Open Markets Institute is hosting today's event. And huge thanks to OMI for partnering with us. Article 19 is a free speech organization operating globally and also working on many issues that we are going to discuss today. We also have a Europe presence, so hope you meet my colleague Mark, who leads our advocacy here, but also other colleagues who are taking part. Before I start, there was supposed to be a picture on the screen with a disclaimer. Oh, what do I do? Oh, yes. So this picture, I need to explain what this is. So my colleagues in the office set up this, what I call oppression jar. So every single time I mention living under communism or some sort of dictatorship, I owe them £1, which means that at the end of this talk, I will be bankrupt. But, I'm doing Lord's work here, or maybe my bid for economy. But to set us off, I want to reflect on the topic of today's discussion, which is democracy, future of free speech, from the vantage point of someone who actually remembers what does it mean to be censored? Or what does it mean to have no freedom of expression and to live without democracy? Because I grew up under in occupied Czechoslovakia in family of reluctant dissidents, emphasis on reluctant there. And people often romanticize this word dissident because it sounds very cinematic, very, very noble. But I can assure you that in reality, it's far less glamorous because it means a life of constant bureaucratic revenge, like losing your job or not having your children right to education, having a house full of bugs. But, by bugs, I mean surveillance, not insect. But people often think that living under dictatorship, it's like a constant blunt force, but I don't remember it that way. I actually remember it as living under circumstances where you know that your words can reach people who most need to hear them, because the public sphere is designed precisely to prevent their arrival. And I carry this experience as memory of absence. There is this strange medical condition called encephalitis lethargica. It means sleeping sickness. I think it was diagnosed sometimes in early 20th century in America, where patients who suffered from it, they were fully awake, they could eat, walk, talk, but they had no idea what was happening around them. They were totally disconnected to their circumstances. And then a powerful drug called L-DOPA was invented, which shook them back to life. And to me, this is what was living like under communism, that majority of the people didn't even bother to argue. And they all kind of fall into this collective sleeping sickness, this collective moral nap. And then the revolution arrived, which woke us up, was kind of L-DOPA shot. And with that, we got freedom. Fortunately, majority of us not in a bloody way. But unfortunately, democracy didn't come with instructions, and some were and are better at improvising than the others. But during democratic transition, I got a fellowship to the United States to learn how to be a lawyer and human rights activist in this new world of democracy. And there I expected the culmination of this moral awakening. But instead what I found was this strange mirror image, because I discovered that there was not a lack of freedom, but how freedom can be camouflaged, how easily ideology can reinvent itself. And what surprised me most in America was that, well, actually what surprised me most in America was there were flags everywhere, on buildings, on cars, on cereal boxes, and schools. And I remember that once I asked my supervisor, like, is there an opportunity where flag is not suitable? And then he thought about it carefully and said, well, maybe a funeral, but even that depends. But what I want to say is that what struck me the most was that the communism labored under the pretense of creating unity through slogans. And I found out America did exactly the same, just with more merchandise and twice the nationalism. And there I realized that democracy and censorship carry many forms, which brings me to now. Because what we are experiencing in the United States, the erosion of democratic norms, the near religious polarization, open hostility to basic rule of law, is a warning in real time. And from my free speech perspective, which admittedly is arguing a lot about what is protected speech and what is not, is that in the United States and maybe globally, freedom of expression is no longer a universal right. It seems to be a tool to divide and silence, something to selectively depending on political convenience. And also this idea of sovereignty has been under attack from corporations operating across the borders, lobbying against democratically adopted norms, and now with the US government threatening trade retaliation for daring to regulate them. I think the EU must wake up and resist craving to such pressure and transactional deals to sacrifice principle. If anything, it must show that it can count as a counterbalance normatively, politically, economically, so that and show that freedom of expression doesn't need to be weaponized, that democracy can be resilient and the rule of law is not negotiable. And it must also properly enforce and continue to set the norms to regulate and ensure democracy in digital age. What scares me most these days is not that the future we are entering in this is this strange Orwellian nightmare with boots on the faces, but that we are again falling collectively into this strange sleeping sickness, into this moral nap that I experienced during my childhood. When we are awake, but not really. When we are responsive to notifications, but indifferent to the meaning. And AI also underpins this infrastructure of sleep. And we must stop talking about it as if it was a destiny, because left in the hands of unaccountable billionaires, it will be perfect dictatorship. Personalized, invisible, frictionless, and you might not even know you are in it. So today, we will discuss concepts like sovereignty, digital regulation, market concentrations, and so on. And these are important concepts, but sometimes, to be honest, they sound very theoretical and technical until you realize that they are about who is awake and who drifts off. So I hope, and for me, the main task for our discussions today is to figure out how to be alert when the powers around us want to lull us back into somnolence, whether it's by ideology, whether it's by corporate interest, by profit-seeking, or other forms of control. And since you are all here, I assume you don't need this metaphorical L-DOPA injection, but I hope that together we can figure out how we keep society awake, and preferably before someone has to stage a bloody revolution to wake us up. So thank you for being here.